Welcome back to the deep dive. So, I want to start today by asking you a question that I think most of us have asked ourselves at some point, usually at like 3 in the morning when you just can't sleep.
Oh, yeah, the dreaded 3 a.m. existential crisis.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So what if you just stopped? Like, what if you looked at the life you built, the career, the house, all the expectations, and you just walked out the door and never came back?
Well, it is the ultimate fantasy, isn't it? The escape hatch. We all have it in the back of our minds. But usually, when people actually pull that lever, it's because things are going wrong.
Yeah, they're running away from something.
Exactly. They're broke, or they're in legal trouble, or just running from a complete disaster.
Right. But the story we are unpacking today is different. We are going to look at a man who pulled that lever when everything was going perfectly. We are talking about Dorian Paskowitz, or as most people know him, Doc Paskowitz.
And to just call him a surfer, really, it really doesn't do it justice.
Not at all. That is kind of like calling Ernest Hemingway just a fisherman.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
This is a guy who had what you could call the golden ticket. He was a Jewish doctor from Texas, and he graduated from Stanford Medical School in 1946, which we will get into because that is a massive deal.
Oh, absolutely massive.
And he basically looked at the American dream and just said, no, thank you. He ended up raising 9 kids in a camper van, refusing to send them to any sort of school, and just chasing waves for a quarter of a century.
It is genuinely one of the most radical sociological experiments of the 20th century. And I do use the word experiment deliberately there, because when you look at the sources we have for this deep dive, the biographical data, the Wikipedia archives, the 2007 documentary Surfwise, you realize this wasn't just a long family vacation.
No, not at all.
This was a man trying to engineer what he saw as a superior way of living, a superior type of human, completely within his own family unit.
Which sounds a little ominous, honestly.
It's extremely complex. It's a story about freedom, for sure, but it's equally a story about control. It forces us to ask if it's even possible to be truly free without inflicting a sort of chaotic reality on the people you love.
And that is exactly the mission for this deep dive. We aren't just doing a biography of a famous surfer. We want to stress test this whole idea of the alternative lifestyle. Because, you look on social media today and van life looks like these beautiful sunsets and portable espresso machines.
Right, it looks curated.
Yeah, curated.
Right.
But the reality of the Paskowitz family was something else entirely. We're going to go through his origin story, how he went from medical school to a surfboard. Then we'll get into the radical living situation, 25 years in a camper van.
Which is just staggering to think about.
We'll dig into his highly controversial philosophy on health and education, look at the shadow side of the family dynamics revealed in that documentary, and finally discuss his late-life activism in Gaza.
It's a wild ride.
So let's go back to the beginning, because to really understand why he left, you have to understand what he was actually walking away from.
Wow.
We need to map this out. Starting in Texas, the physician who quit.
Right. Dorian Paskowitz, born March 3, 1921 in Galveston, Texas. Now, looking at the demographic context here is really important. He's the son of Russian Jewish immigrants, Louis and Rose Paskowitz.
And being part of a Jewish immigrant family in Texas in the 1920s, that comes with a very specific kind of pressure, doesn't it?
Immense pressure. You have to remember the narrative of that generation of immigrants. The ethos was very much, we came here with a nothing so you could be everything.
Right.
Success wasn't really an option, it was a mandate. And the Paskowitz kids had serious drive. I mean, his sister was Sonia Darin.
The actress. She was in The Big Sleep with Humphrey Bogart. Right?
Correct. So you have this incredibly high-achieving gene pool. And Dorian, he aims for the absolute peak of professional success. He goes to San Diego State, transfers to Stanford University, and then he gets into Stanford Medical School.
Okay, let's stop right there. I want to really drill down on this for you listening. Stanford Medical School in 1946. Today, obviously, being a doctor is highly prestigious. But in 1946, what did that actually mean for his social standing?
It is hard to overstate it. You have to look at the historical moment. World War II has just ended. The United States is really the only superpower left standing with its infrastructure completely intact. The economy is about to explode into this massive post-war boom.
And medicine was changing, too.
Exactly. Medicine was entering its golden age. Antibiotics like penicillin were becoming widely available. Doctors were actively conquering diseases that used to be death sentences. A doctor in 1946 wasn't just seen as a highly skilled service provider. A doctor was practically a god in a white coat.
So he is holding this Stanford medical degree. He is set for life. Guaranteed wealth, guaranteed respect. The country club membership, the big house in the suburbs, the whole 9 yards.
He had the keys to the kingdom. He had made it by every single metric that American society had to offer. If he had just stayed on that path, he would have been a wealthy, retired physician playing golf in Palm Springs by the 1980s.
But something happened in that exact same year he graduated,
Yeah.
1946. There's a crack in the windshield.
The catalyst. He visits Hawaii.
Now, Hawaii in 46 wasn't the resort destination that you and I know today. It wasn't even a state yet.
No, it was a territory. It was much wilder, much more raw. And while he is there, he goes surfing with Duke Hanamoku.
The Duke, basically the father of modern surfing.
The absolute legend. And you have to realize this isn't like taking a surf lesson at a resort today where they push you into a wave on a soft foam board. Surfing in 1946 meant handling massive, heavy redwood planks.
Right, they didn't have fiberglass.
Exactly. These boards weighed nearly 100 pounds. It was a deeply physically demanding, visceral battle with the ocean.
I am just imagining the contrast here. On one hand, he has the sterile, rigid, extremely high-stakes world of the hospital. Fluorescent lights, life and death, rigid hierarchies. And on the other hand, he is out in the Pacific Ocean with the Duke, wrestling a 100-pound piece of wood on a massive wave.
That is the big aha moment for him. It wasn't just a fun afternoon. It was a spiritual awakening. He saw a fluidity and a connection to nature out in the water that suddenly made the hospital feel like a prison. But, and this is a key point, he didn't quit right then and there.
Right, he tried to play the part for a while.
He did. He went back to the mainland. He practiced medicine. But the source material points to a very turbulent personal life during this period. He had 2 marriages that ultimately failed while he was working as a doctor.
And he had 2 daughters from those early marriages.
Yes. And while we don't have extensive, deep details on the day-to-day of those relationships, the overall pattern is super clear. He was trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. The golden handcuffs were chafing him. He was making money. He had the status, but he was completely miserable. The sources quote him simply realizing that he, quote, was not happy as a doctor.
It sounds so simple when you say it like that. I wasn't happy. But think about the courage or maybe the madness it takes to admit that when you were that deep into a career, most people in that situation would just die convertible or something. They wouldn't dismantle their entire existence.
Well, that is the difference between a midlife crisis and a total paradigm shift. Paskowitz was looking for a completely new paradigm. And interestingly, his first major pivot wasn't actually moving into a van. It was moving to Israel.
This is in the 1950s, right?
Yes. He travels to Israel for a year, and he finds a real resonance there. He felt more at home, more himself in that environment than he ever did in the American medical establishment. He even tried to join the military.
During the Suez Crisis in 1956.
Right. He actively volunteered for the Israeli army. He wanted to fight. He wanted to be part of something visceral and real, something physical.
But they turned him down.
They did. But that rejection didn't send him crawling back to a hospital in California. It actually solidified his resolve. He realized he couldn't go back to the rat race. When he returned to the U.S., he was officially done. He decided to dedicate his life entirely to surfing.
And this leads us right into the radical experiment. Because he didn't just become a solitary beach bum, he built a tribe.
This is where the story shifts from a simple biography to a sociological study. He meets his 3rd wife, Juliette Paez.
And Juliette, we really have to give her credit here. She went along with a life plan that almost anyone else would run screaming from.
She was the anchor of this whole operation. Without her, Doc is just a guy shouting at the waves. With her, he became a patriarch, they get married, and they start having kids. A lot of kids.
9 children in total, 8 sons and 1 daughter.
And they decide, or rather, the sources indicate Doc largely decides, that they are not going to live in a house. They are going to live on the road, embracing this transient bohemian lifestyle.
And they kept this up for roughly 25 years.
A quarter of a century.
I really want to pause here and visualize this. Because when we say they lived in a camper van, I think modern listeners might be picturing a luxury Sprinter van or a big Winnebago with slide-outs and a separate master bedroom.
Not even close. We are talking about a succession of very basic used camper vans, often around 24 feet long, for 11 people.
11 people in 24 feet. That is basically prison density.
It is tighter than a submarine. Imagine the logistics of that daily life. Where do people sleep? They were literally stacked like cordwood inside this thing. Where do you put the surfboards? How do you cook meals?
The bathroom situation alone is enough to induce panic.
It forced a level of intimacy that is almost incomprehensible to modern families. There is no going to your room to cool off. There is no privacy. If you have an argument, the whole family is part of the argument. If one person catches a cold, all 11 people get the cold.
But it wasn't just a chaotic free-for-all. This is what fascinates me the most. It wasn't some hippie commune where everyone just did whatever they felt like doing. It was a strict dictatorship. Doc ran that van like a boot camp.
Absolutely. He was the commander.
Yeah.
And the overarching mission of this boot camp was health. But not health in the way you or I might casually think of it. He had a very specific, rigid philosophy.
Let's talk about the Paskowitz regime. What are the actual rules?
Well, first and foremost, surfing was mandatory.
Which sounds cool at first until you realize you have to do it every single day, whether you want to or not.
Exactly. It wasn't just playtime, it was rigorous training. Everyone was expected to improve their skills daily. Every morning they were out in the water. But the diet is where it gets really intense.
Contagion is the word that comes to mind. Tell us about breakfast.
Doc achieved this sort of health guru status eventually. He was actually way ahead of his time in rejecting processed foods, refined sugars, and the whole fast food culture that was booming in the 60s and 70s.
He was definitely onto something there.
He was, but he took it to an absolute extreme. He advocated for natural diets very low in fat. One of his children later described their stable breakfast meal as a multi-grain gruel.
Gruel. I am picturing this gray, flavorless paste.
That is pretty much exactly what it was. No sugar, no milk, just raw, functional fuel. Doc fundamentally believed that food was for function, not for pleasure. He even believed that feeling a little hunger was good for you. He kept the kids incredibly lean.
So you have these 9 kids waking up in a cramped 24-foot van, eating literal paste, and then being marched into the cold ocean to train. It feels less like the endless summer and more like ancient Spartan training.
That is a fantastic analogy. He was raising Spartans. He wanted them to be tough, highly resilient, and completely independent of what he saw as the soft American lifestyle. He viewed modern comfort almost as a disease.
But here's the thing that really rubs people the wrong way, and we have to dig into it. There's one thing to control their diet and their exercise. It is another thing entirely to control their minds. Which brings us to his philosophy on knowledge versus wisdom.
This is undoubtedly the most controversial part of the Paskowitz legacy. Remember our context here. Doc is a Stanford man. He even spent time teaching at community colleges like Palomar College. He knew exactly what the value of a formal education was.
And yet, he completely banned it for his own kids.
Completely. None of the 9 Paskowitz children received any formal education while they were living on the road. No high school, no elementary school.
Did he even homeschool them? Was there some kind of curriculum in the van?
Not in any traditional sense, no. There were no textbooks, there were no exams. Doc's entire philosophy was based on a very sharp distinction between knowledge and wisdom.
Break that down for us. What was his argument?
He believed that formal school systems were just factories. He thought that formal education homogenized the mind, that it taught you to think like everyone else, to just be a compliant cog in the machine. The source material shows he viewed formal education as literally dangerous to young minds.
Dangerous. That is a heavy accusation coming from a guy with a medical degree.
He believed that true wisdom came from real-world experience, from travel, from meeting everyday people in beach parking lots, from negotiating with local mechanics when the van broke down, from learning to read the currents of the ocean. He wanted his children to be street smart in the deepest possible sense of the term. He wanted them to live in the world, not just read about it in a classroom.
I had to play devil's advocate here, though. That sounds very romantic, but isn't it also incredibly limiting? I mean, street smarts are great, but they don't help you understand calculus or world history or even how to write a standard resume.
That is the critical flaw in his experiment. He personally had the safety net. He had the Stanford degree. He could always go back to being a doctor if the surfing lifestyle failed. And in fact, he occasionally did pick up short-term medical work just to fund the gas tank. But his children, they had zero safety net. He cut the net away entirely.
He burned their bridges before they even had a chance to cross them.
Precisely. He bet their entire futures on his personal philosophy.
So the million-dollar question, did the bet actually pay off? Were they successful?
Well, it depends entirely on what metrics you use to define success. If you define it by the metrics Doc valued surfing ability, physical health, artistic output, then yes, it was a massive success.
They became known as the first family of surfing.
They did. They were absolute icons in that world. For instance, Israel Paskowitz Izzy became a world-class competitive surfer. He won the U.S. Longboarding Championship in 1989. You also had significant commercial success with endorsement income. And creative output, too. Salvador became a successful screenwriter and producer. Adam and Josh started a rock band called The Flies.
The Flies. Got You Where I Want You. That song was absolutely everywhere in the late 90s.
Right. So clearly, these kids weren't unintelligent. They were highly creative, driven, and talented. You could certainly argue that the lack of formal schooling allowed their natural creativity to flourish uncensored by institutional rules.
But, and there's always a but, when we talk about this family, we really have to look at the human cost. Because you simply cannot lock 9 kids in a van for 2 decades without creating some serious psychological scar tissue. Which brings us to the shadow side of the story.
This is where the narrative sharply shifts from the sunny legend to the gritty reality. For years, the Paskowitz family was this mythical, perfect entity in surfing magazines. But in 2007, a documentary called Surfwise came out.
Directed by Doug Prey, and I've read about this. It was definitely not a promotional puff piece.
No, it was a deep, often painful confessional. And here is a detail from the sources that I find absolutely staggering. Doc Paskowitz attended the premiere, he went to the screenings, but he never actually watched the film.
Wait, explain that. He was physically in the theater.
He would go to the event, shake hands, smile for the press cameras, and then he would wait out in the lobby or just leave while the movie actually played. He point-blank refused to see the mirror that the film held up to his life.
That is the ultimate form of denial. Sort of a, I lived it, I don't need to see it attitude. Or maybe it was more like, I can't bear to hear how my kids actually felt about me.
I heavily lean toward the latter, because the film revealed what was described as a very uneasy atmosphere. The kids didn't paint a picture of endless summer joy. They spoke openly about holding very deep resentments.
What were the main grievances they had?
The lack of education was a huge one. Many of them felt completely crippled when they finally stepped out of the van and into the real world. They felt stupid. They didn't know how to open a bank account, how to interact with normal society. They felt like aliens.
And there was something darker too, right? The privacy issue in the van.
Yes. In a 24-foot van, sexual privacy between the parents is essentially impossible. The children were exposed to their parents' sexual activity in a way that was unavoidable given the space, but also deeply inappropriate for kids to be around.
That is just a trauma. You can't spin that as being bohemian or natural. That is psychologically damaging.
It blurred vital boundaries that children fundamentally need for their own security. And then on top of that, there were the rules. Doc was a tyrant. It was his way or the highway, literally. If you disagreed with his philosophy, you were seen as crushing the family's vibe.
Did anyone manage to break out early?
Yes, David, the eldest son. He left the van at age 23 to find his own life.
23 seems pretty late to be running away from home.
It is late. But think about the psychology of the situation. When you are raised in a sort of cult-like environment, and I use that term loosely, but it fits, the isolationist dynamic they had, leaving is terrifying. The outside world is framed as the enemy. Doc had taught them their whole lives that the world was sick and the van was the only healthy place. So leaving meant entering the sick world completely alone.
And without a high school diploma.
Exactly. So David leaving was a massive rupture for the family. And there were various periods of estrangement where different children wouldn't speak to their parents for a long time.
And this is the twist that makes this whole story so human. They didn't stay away forever.
No. By the time Surfwise was being filmed, all the children had reconciled with Doc and Juliet.
Why do you think that is? Is it some form of Stockholm Syndrome? Or is it just deep family love?
Yeah. I think it's what psychologists call a trauma bond. They went through something together that literally no one else on Earth could ever understand. Only a Paskowitz knows what it is like to be a Paskowitz. They are a tribe in the truest sense. They fought, they screamed, it was traumatic, but they remained a tight-knit unit. That first family of surfing title held true despite all the internal friction.
It's incredibly complicated, it's messy, but it's real.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to pivot to the final act of Doc's life. Because just when you think you have him completely pegged as this selfish, controlling patriarch, he does something incredibly selfless. Let's talk about Surfing for Peace.
This is a fascinating chapter. It's August 2007. Doc is in his 80s at this point.
He's an old man.
He is, but he reads an article in the LA Times about the situation in the Gaza Strip.
And just for context for you listening, 2007 in Gaza was an extremely volatile time.
Yes, To provide the geopolitical facts here, Hamas had just taken control of Gaza in June of 2007. The region was incredibly tense. Israel had imposed a strict blockade, and they were only allowing essential humanitarian supplies to cross the border: food, medicine, that sort of thing.
And Doc reads this article about this blockaded zone, and what does he take away from it?
Well, the article specifically mentioned that there was a small community of surfers in Gaza, but they didn't have any surfboards. They were trying to surf by sharing broken pieces of foam. And Doc, this Jewish doctor who had tried to join the Israeli army back in the 50s, looks at that and thinks, that is a tragedy I can actually fix.
To him, a surfer without a board was almost worse than a patient without a medicine.
In a way, yes. He viewed surfing as a universal language, almost a fundamental human right. So he launches this project called Surfing for Peace.
But practically speaking, how do you get surfboards into a highly secured, blockaded zone? You can't exactly just ship them through the mail.
No, it required serious negotiation. You had to personally persuade the Israeli government and the defense forces to let them through. So Doc teamed up with his son David, the same one who walked away at 23, as well as Arthur Rochevon and the legendary Kelly Slater.
Basically the Michael Jordan of surfing.
Exactly. Having Kelly Slater involved brought massive global attention to the effort. They also worked with an organization called the One Voice Movement, which is a pro-Israeli Palestinian peace organization.
And what was his pitch to the government? Why let surfboards in?
Doc's core philosophy here was about using the shared experience of surfing to bridge cultural and political barriers. He argued that if people from opposite sides are out in the water catching waves together, they aren't fighting. He believed surfing could bridge those divides.
And against all odds, he actually pulled it off.
He did. They successfully crossed the border, delivered the boards, and even held a follow-up concert in Tel Aviv later that year.
I just love the visual of this 86-year-old man standing on a beach in Gaza, handing a surfboard to a local kid. It complicates his character so much. He wasn't just the tyrant of the camper van. He was also this visionary who believed in the power of the ocean.
He truly believed the ocean didn't care about your politics or your religion. It was the one place where everyone was completely equal. It connects right back to his time in Israel in the 50s.
So let's look at the end of the road. Doc's legacy and his final years. He lived a remarkably long time.
He made it to 93.
So the multi-grain gruel actually worked.
It certainly seems to have done the trick. He passed away on November 10th, 2014 in Newport Beach. And frankly, it was only a hip surgery earlier that year that finally caused his decline. The sources note he was actively surfing well into his late 80s.
That is just incredible longevity.
He even authored a book called Surfing in Health, which came out in 1997 and was republished in 2007. He received numerous accolades. He was inducted into the Southern California Jewish Sports Hall of Fame in 2000. He was referred to as a legend by everyone in the community, including Kelly Slater.
There was even Hollywood interest in his life.
Yes. Variety reported in 2010 that Sean Penn expressed serious interest in producing and starring in a movie about Doc.
Which would be absolutely perfect casting.
It really would be. But now that he is gone, we are left to make sense of the experiment he ran.
So let's synthesize all of this. We have a man who was essentially a walking bundle of contradictions. A highly trained doctor who hated the medical establishment. A father who clearly loved his kids but denied them basic education and privacy. A Jewish man who championed Palestinian surfers.
He forces us to look at our own priorities. We live in a modern society that values security above almost everything else. We insure everything, we plan everything out, we get educated for jobs we might not even like just to have stability. Doc Paskowitz valued experience above all else.
But the cost of prioritizing that pure experience was creating a lot of chaos for the people around him.
Chaos, yes, but also an incredible vitality. He lived every single day on his own terms. He certainly didn't sleepwalk through life.
Here's the big takeaway for you listening to this. We all have scripts we are following. Doc burned his script. But when you burn the script, you have to write a new one every single morning. And that is exhausting. And sometimes it inevitably hurts the people closest to you.
That is the ultimate trade-off. You can have total, unbridled freedom, or you can have stability and comfort. You very rarely get to have both.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Doc firmly believed that traditional education was dangerous because it homogenized the mind, that it just made us all think exactly the same way. Now look at our world today. In an age of constant information overload, where we are all doom-scrolling the exact same social feeds, reading the same news algorithms, watching the same viral shows, was he actually right? Is there a real danger in homogenizing our minds?
Or did he just replace society's form of control with his own? Did he free his children from the machine only to imprison them inside his own ego in that van?
That is the question you have to answer for yourself. And I really don't think there was an easy answer. But I bet the view from the window of that van was pretty spectacular.
Just don't ask about what was for breakfast.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Go catch a wave, or maybe just take a different unplanned route to work today. See what happens when you break the script.
Goodbye.
See ya.